This is Nan McKay. Welcome to Community Trailblazers podcast, referred to as the Academy Series. Most of the fellows inducted into the Academy of Housing and Communities have lived through many presidents, many generations, and many changes. We explore what has and has not changed in urbanism, but perhaps should be reconsidered. And we ask the question, what will housing and cities look like in 50 years? Please subscribe on our website, trailblazersimpact.com, and contact us at hello@trailblazersimpact.com. Read our blogs and shop on our site to support these podcasts while we share the stories. Harold Benjamin Finger started his career as an American aeronautical nuclear engineer and the former head of the United States nuclear rocket program. He worked for both NACA, NACA, and NASA. In 1969, Mr. Finger brought an outstanding background with him to HUD, when then Assistant Secretary Dwight Inc. recruited him to beef up the next phase of HUD's research and development capacity under incoming Secretary George Romney. It was especially needed after the passage of the 1968 Housing and Urban Development Act, which was passed under the previous administration under the leadership of Secretary Robert Weaver, and which sets goals of 6 million new or rehabbed affordable housing units over a 10-year period. This enormous change in the scale on the supply side was accompanied by a number of new tools, including a section that mandated a demonstration involving industrialized housing based on European successes. Harry also started the Housing Allowance Experiment Program. So, two major innovations at HUD. Harry is 96 today. In 2002, he was interviewed for the NASA headquarters Oral History Project. They kindly allowed us to include the part of the interview that discusses HUD and housing in our podcast. We conclude the podcast with a few words from Harry at his home today.
Today is May 16th, 2002. This interview with Harry Finger is being conducted in his home in Chevy Chase, Maryland for the NASA Oral History Project. The interviewer is Kevin Rusnak. I'd like to thank you for inviting me into your home this morning to spend a few hours with you.
Well, it's good to be with you. Let me tell you, I'm pleased to be able to talk about some of these subjects.
Well, great. Well, if we can start off with, as I suggested, some of your background that brought you into the NACA, your education, that sort of thing.
Okay. I was born and raised in New York City. Born in Brooklyn, then moved to the Bronx. In fact, my family, though I can't remember any of it because I was just a tot, lived on Kelly Street, which is where Colin Powell later was raised. So it was a mixed kind of community. And then we moved further up into the Bronx. And I went to grade school and then got into an advanced school, Townsend Harris High School, which was kind of a prep school for the City College in New York. I graduated from there in 1940. I was born in 24, so I was 16 when I graduated from high school. I rode by subway downtown to where one of the City College schools is on 23rd Street by myself without any trouble or fear. My parents weren't worried about it or anything. Then I went to City College and went into the School of Engineering and got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering in 44, May of 44. We were at war at that time. And before I actually graduated, in anticipation of graduation, and I had a deferral till I graduated. I applied for a commission in the Navy and went through several discussions, hearings, and some tests, basically. And went to my last one, and in my mind, there was no question I was going to be an ensign in the Navy. It was in '69 that I got the call to come over and talk to the new Secretary of HUD, George Romney. I didn't know him. I didn't know the Undersecretary, Dick Van Dusen. And I said, I'm really thinking about leaving government. And in fact, I had explored a couple of possibilities. One was to go to Westinghouse and maybe head all the international activities at Westinghouse. There was another one to, well, with not General Electric, with another company. But the principal, I was thinking of leaving government. And I got this call, and it was during that period of turmoil in the cities. Riots, real problems. We discussed major issues related to just normal living in the cities, LA, Chicago, and so on. And I got the call, and they offered me, talked about two different jobs, one to head all the administrative functions in HUD, or to head all the research, and they were going to establish a new position of assistant administrator, assistant secretary for research and technology. For research, they didn't have a hard concept of it. And which would I prefer? And I said, well, I think I'd lean to the research one. I said, but I can't say that I'm really experienced in these areas. And they said, well, look, that's okay. You've done a variety of work. So I asked that I think about it. If I could just think about it a while. They said, sure, call us back. Well, I realized right then, they never asked me my political affiliation. Didn't ask. And I've told this to a couple of people, but not too many. The next morning, I called this Dick Van Dusen, the undersecretary. And I said, look, in case I decide I do want to come over, I don't want things to get spoiled because you didn't ask me some questions that may be significant. He said, like what? I said, well, neither you nor the secretary asked me anything about my political affiliation. And they said, well, what? What's the problem there? I said, well, I've always been registered as a Democrat. And he said, where? I said, Maryland. He said, it doesn't matter. Just didn't matter. And by the way, there were a lot of changes that had been made in NASA, I should point out, while I was there, in the way things were run, the way presentations were made, the way program proposals were made, program plans and so on, a lot of that, a lot. And I decided, well, okay, maybe this is a good time to make a change, and I'm interested in some of these areas, some of the social questions and so on. So I decided to take that, the research side, and that's just the way it happened. It came out of the blue. I really don't know how they learned of me. I have a hunch that I've never checked out that one of the people who had worked in AEC, who had also worked in HUD and handled some of the administrative functions, although not the totality of it, may have suggested me. And I've never specifically asked him that question. He never volunteered it, an answer. So I figured, okay, I won't ask him. And I see him, even now. So I have a feeling it may have come from there, that word got out. But he left HUD about that time and went to Bureau of the Budget, I think. And he was in government a long time after that. He went someplace else. So I decided to take that job.
Do you have any regrets leaving NASA?
Oh, no. Not a bit. It produced a much broader range of activity. I never lost my connection with NASA and its people and the programs I was involved in. But there were new opportunities, new interests that came up with it. New technology areas, major new programs on the social side as well as the technology side. And I really am delighted that I made that move.
By the time you had left NASA, had your your style of management or your basic principles changed since you first started managing people there?
Gee, I don't think so. I don't know that they've ever changed. I really don't.
Okay.
I honestly don't. I think I'm being honest and saying, no, I had the same perspective. You work with a team, with everybody.
Right.
Everybody's got to have a role in the operation. And that I've encouraged that. I've always worked it that way. That's kind of a theme. And you want to get really good people in who have a real capability
Sure.
in those functions. Incidentally, when I went to HUD, I looked for a building technology capability. And it turned out the National Bureau of Standards, now the National Institute of Standards and Technology, had some people who had worked on building technology. And I set up an office there to serve as an arm of mine, because one of the things we went to work on in HUD very early was what was called Operation Breakthrough, a major program to develop new technology, new production methods for housing to try to reduce the cost and improve quality. And I needed capability in that area. I actually lined up with some of the unions as well in that process. In fact, we had major meetings with the unions talking about that Operation Breakthrough. Now, Operation Breakthrough had technology elements as well as building sample communities of mixed income housing, trying to provide a social mix of people in sample communities. So here I was again, technology and the social issues very significantly there. And we built several sample communities around the United States, in Michigan, near Atlanta, in Georgia. We tried to build one in California, Sacramento, Phoenix, various places. We tried to build one in Delaware, Newcastle, Delaware. The governor had proposed a site. We got proposals from various locations. The governor had proposed a site. When we picked it, there was an uproar in that community. They didn't want, automatically, if it was government coming in, it had to be public housing. They didn't want public housing. So we finally backed out of that site. And while I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, did we ever build one in Houston? I can't recall. I'll have to check that. I can't recall. It's out of my head right now. So we moved forward on that kind of a program, and I had to build an organization. And the way I built it was the same way I had built it before, looking for technical arms in those areas, wherever I could find it. The last thing is a program called Housing Allowance Experimental Program. One of the issues was, are we better off building housing for the poor or giving them money to improve their housing situation? So we started this program, Housing Allowance Experimental Program, where we gave sample communities, we gave people money and tried to measure what did they do with the money? Who would manage such a program? We had sample local housing authorities or other government groups within the cities or states. And would it generate new housing construction on its own? The interesting thing is I left probably 2 years after that, a year or two after that program got started. The program ran for 10 years with detailed data evaluation all along the way. And it became the base for a major housing program called a Section 8 program, where they provide vouchers or certificates. Vouchers, you can use the money given on a certificate in a particular housing unit that they've previously approved as acceptable. So it is a boon to a developer who wants to have some assurance of income. A voucher is one where people can use it any way they want. Things like that. There was a whole variety of things that we worked on in that program. But one of the elements was developing new technology. And again, as I mentioned, we built sample communities with a mixture of technologies, but with that also a mixture of social makeup in the area to see how it would work. I keep saying, one of these days, I haven't done it, I'd like to go back and visit each of those sites to see how they're operating, contrasted with the problems that were very apparent then in public housing, which were really serious. In fact, at that time, we were destroying public housing, like out in St. Louis, the Pruitt-Igoe project, we destroyed that because it was a total social failure with criminal acts and so on. I remember being out there once, and I was being led around the area, and as we passed the entrance to the Pruitt-Igoe, I said, wait a minute, let's not go by here, let's go in there. The guy who was escorting me said, we're not going in there without an armed guard. Public housing, high-rise public housing, things like that. And in Chicago, awful. And yet Chicago's a city made up of such a mixture of people and uses and everything. Yeah, I don't know. Some of that I expect still exists, but someday I keep saying I'd like to go back and revisit the sites. I'll have to look it all up and see if Houston is on the list of one of the sites. It was that kind of a variety of things. Mm-hmm. By the way, kept Tom Paine involved. I even kept Jim Webb involved in some of the things I was involved working on and considering. I goofed one time seriously because one of the Appropriations Committee chairmen proposed a site for Operation Breakthrough. And instead of his site, we selected another one in his state. And I somehow in the press release, I emphasized that site, the competitive site, well, he wanted to eliminate the whole budget as a result. So I talked to Jim Webb and I said, look, can I go to the chairman of the whole committee and indicate that this is a problem? And he said, okay, Harry, I know the chairman. I'll just mention it to him. I said, I think I want to send a letter to this congressman to apologize for what I did. He said, that'll only hurt you more. I went to him for advice. And we ended up getting the money we needed for the program, for the one side anyway. I can't say what is my primary role. I have difficulty saying that. It's being involved in major issues that confront us in many ways. And that's the way I view it, as well as just talking very strongly about the benefits of the space program, which is not one of those major issues that confronts us. Energy is, housing and community development issues are, and so on. And broad public management, I think, is a big issue.
That concludes the interview for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Johnson Space Center Oral History Project. We would recommend that you listen to the entire interview and other interviews like this. The link to their project is on our website, www.trailblazersimpact.com. Harry is still an active member of the Academy, and Kent Watkins visited him recently at his home. Kent Watkins is with Harry Finger today, and he will also participate in the podcast. Kent is the chair of the American Academy, but also was the executive assistant to the first Secretary of HUD, Bob Weaver, and one of the insiders who was involved in that 1968 Housing Act. Harry, you have had one of the most impressive careers I've ever encountered.
That goes back a long way. But we at HUD had just created the Office of Research for the first time. Because of the new act, it was necessary to expand that to create an assistant secretary position for research and development. Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You took over and created the name for the new program called Operation Breakthrough. That's the program I brought in. In fact, I was Assistant Secretary for
research and technology in HUD in 69 to 72.
You had two major programs. One was Operation Breakthrough, and the other one was the Housing Allowance Experiment Program.
You remember some of the things you did back then?
72, I left and I went to the Center for Energy Systems and Management, Electric Utility Engineering Operation, Electric Company.
Do you remember working with Dwight Inc. and Secretary Romney?
Yes, I got to know White Inc.
Also took on the Housing Allowance Experiment Program, which became the forerunner of the Section 8 program.
That's right.
Harry, what do you remember were some exciting times back then?
Yes, it was really a sense of, I felt it was very important. There was also an independence that I had where I could work fairly freely.
I thank you for all you did for the country, and you did so much in so many areas of the government that I'm really proud of you.
Yes, we all are.
I wish I could remember it all.
If we could accomplish just a part of what Harry did in his lifetime, it would be a better world for all. Thank you, Harry, and look forward to being 100. This is Nan McKay. I hope you've enjoyed listening to another episode in the Academy series. You can connect with us at hello@trailblazersimpact.com. Subscribe to us on our website, trailblazersimpact.com, and social media, and come again with us on the journey to explore the past, to give new life to the future. Tune in to the Community Trailblazers podcast, the Trailblazers Impact podcast, and the Peace Through Business podcast. Write a comment about what you like about the podcasts that we can post on our website. And remember, you must learn a new way to think before you can master a new way to be.